Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Experience AV episode 14. Today, we're talking about seeking the consistent AV experience. And with us returning again from last 2 weeks ago, I was going to say it last week, but I think it's 2 weeks ago, the esteemed Mr. Fred Laux. Fred, welcome back.
Hello, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again. How's yeah, that was nice, Jim. Good sound
It's good.
effects. We should
I got it.
How's it going, Fred? How's life been treating you? How's the weather?
The weather's lovely. As you can see, I'm ready for summer. Although in Idaho, that means like still looking at like highs of 70 or so, and getting down to like mid 40s at night and in the early mornings. But I am ready for summer. I've got my shirt. I've got my Corona and lime, so I'm ready to go.
Excellent.
Yeah, I never put Corona, flamingo shirts, and Idaho all together in the same sentence before. So that's
I'm a contradiction. Yeah.
well, man, glad to have you. How about you, Jim? How's things?
Things are good, man. I just got back from doing a standby at a college graduation, and they have stepped up their game from from my college graduation. It was intense. They had some incredible line arrays. They had uh, portable temporary video walls, like 10 foot by 20 foot setup. It was sick, and they like getting a chance to work with those live event guys is a completely different experience than the installed folks. They're a different breed, but man, they put on a great show and they had a lot of fun and they were an absolute pleasure to work with. So yeah, it's been a great couple of days.
That's awesome, man. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I just sharing on my side. This last weekend, I know I've shared this story a couple times here internally, but gave a lot of time to the marching band. I've commented on the marching band quite a bit on this show over last season, and it was pretty cool. They gave out awards last Friday. It was kind of the end of the year celebration for all of the band and all the work that they had done. They'd won state championships for the marching band, and they took second place in state for the winter drum line. And they gave out awards to the kids, and they give out awards to the volunteers. And there was like a staff award, and there was a booster club award, and there was a kids or the student nominated award. And yours truly got the student nominated award for volunteering and helping with the sound system. So it was really cool, man. I know I've got the virtual background on, but as a little prop, they gave me a picture of the whole band that's signed by all the band
Wow.
members.
That's awesome, dude.
It was really cool,
Fancy.
man. It was really cool, and it was even more cool that it was the students and the kids that nominated. So that was totally unexpected, and my daughter was super proud of me. So I was still vibing off of that for sure.
So
It's
cool,
awesome.
man. Yeah,
Yeah, it was
there's
exciting,
nothing like being recognized. That's beautiful. That's great.
especially when it's unexpected, man. And
Yeah.
it's the little things like that. It just goes a long way. So yeah, that's what's been going on, and beyond that, because I always have to give the scorched earth weather report. We're very quickly hitting that 100-degree weather, and pool is warming up, and summer is here for Arizona. So,
Wow.
well,
It was a quick spring.
I don't know about you guys, but I am really excited for InfoCom. It is coming very, very quickly at this point.
Freaking me out. In a good way. In a really good way, but it is coming up quick.
It is. It feels like it's basically tomorrow. Which I
Yeah.
guess that's a good segue back to the topic of today's video, right? Of today's podcast, and seeking the consistent AV experience. So, Jim, if you'd be so kind, because this is definitely related to one of the topics and sessions you're doing at InfoCom, why don't you kick off the discussion?
Yeah. So, I mean, as integrators, we're kind of used to taking things a project at a time. But if we put ourselves in the shoes of the technology managers, where the AV department might be headed in the US and they have to deploy systems around the world, it's a completely different story with completely different focuses. And so the challenge is, especially with technology management headquarters in one region, and trying to deploy and manage these deployments around the world, how do you provide that consistent AV experience for your users, regardless of region? When you have potentially different designers, you've got different installers, you've got different users. Like, I don't know. To me, it seems like a really daunting task. If we didn't have the experience we've had, I would be completely lost in how to approach something like that. Because different regions, you've got um, different vendor relationships, potentially different manufacturer relationships. You've got different customs and cultures, and maybe even different feature sets. So, like, I don't know where in your brains, let's remove our experience for now. Like, where would you start as a technology manager, Fred?
Who? Who? Me? Yeah. I've never had to ask myself this question before. Yeah, hard to remove my experience. Those lessons were hard fought, and I think hard won. Yeah. So where would I start? Hmm, I'll avoid like colorful colloquialisms and just go with fix what's going into the system first. So the very first thing, like architecture, architectural standards, design standards, right? As much as you possibly can. Uh, and as you're going down that path, you're also sort of working, in my mind, the kind of maybe the most important thing, or maybe the second most important thing, is especially in big organizations, is the coalition building.
Say that again. The coalition building.
Coalition building, yeah. So one of the hardest things when you are responsible for trying to can make the experience consistent across a global enterprise, maybe, or even just a national national franchise or something like that, is when you have to create that. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, and there are a lot of people who have probably been managing the AV before you came along, or been doing just fine before you came in with your big corporate mindset to try and fix this. I firmly believe a top-down approach works extremely well for this, and I'm not going to shy away from that. It needs to be an edict, right, from CIO level, in my opinion. But once you have that charter, right, you have to, before standards, right. I'll just step on my own answer. Coalition building. Who are the people, right? Who are your friends? Who are the people that you need to get on, right? Procurement, regional IT, right? At the various sites. Who are the big business units that are using conference rooms a lot, right? Maybe you have an R&D division, you have operations or HR division, right? Like, start coalition building friends, ask questions, like, because it doesn't matter if you got the best architecture in the world. If you don't build a coalition, you're not going to get it off. And you wouldn't expect an AV manager to have to be an expert in corporate politics, but man, it goes a long way. It goes a long way for either yourself or for your directors, right, or whoever might be, up the chain from the AV manager, to understand the vision and go out there and go coalition build and get momentum.
I think that's crucial. Like, when you said coalition building, I thought I had it in my head like a physical building. That's why it took me a little bit to catch up, but I'm there now. And you nailed it. Like, I had a colleague who was thoroughly convinced of this. They wanted standards. They came to us. There was trust there. We had a long history with them. But when I started to explain, what responsibilities they would have as a technology manager, he started to float that through to his colleagues in the different regions, and everyone got scared. They had built these relationships, they had a certain way of doing things, and even though the relationships were usually challenging and they weren't providing the users what they needed, people were upset. There was no cohesion among the different offerings in the different regions, and we provided a solution to it because of those relationships, and because, like you said, it didn't come from the top down, it was dead on arrival. Like we couldn't move forward, and it fizzled. The whole project fizzled because of those regional relationships.
Yeah.
No, I gotta jump in here for just a second because Fred, I didn't think that was the answer you were going to come out with first, right? Which I think is it's a great indicator. I think technical people, integrators, solution providers, right? We always want to talk about all the nuts and bolts details of how to deliver a consistent experience, right? We can answer that question, I think, 35 different ways in terms of things that you should be thinking about or best practices or approaches that you should be adopting. But I love the fact that you started there because all of those other things really don't matter if you don't have that coalition built. And I actually looked up the definition of coalition because it's just, number one, a great word. And I loved it. It's an alliance for combined action. Right. What a great definition of coalition. And again, if you don't have those champions, if you don't, and it even reminds me of a Jockoism, right? A Jockoism of managing up and down the chain of command, right? You've really got to go make sure that all of the stakeholders and that you build champions and advocates within the environment before you even take that first step. So, that's really interesting. That is not what I expected you to say, but completely makes sense from a top-down approach.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, just echoing on that, grassroots, I don't think I don't think I'll ever see a grassroots movement to implement standardization. The closest I could see is like broad push for Zoom, right? Or something like that, right? Some UC platform, something that's end user facing. But this is a complicated machine, it's a big complicated machine with a lot of moving parts. So, just stepping away from it for a moment, the big picture is you need to envision the machine, like what it's going to be, right? What needs to come into it, what needs to go out of it, who needs to be involved. Once you get the big picture of what this machine is supposed to look like, this architecture, this program, right? That then becomes who the people you're going to go coalition build, right? Once you have the vision, you have to go get everyone else to see it, right? Otherwise, there's no point in even starting, in my opinion. Like, don't even bother. Don't try to enforce standards if you don't have, the coalition. If you don't have the vision, if you can't share it, it's not for the faint of heart. It's very difficult work, right? If you get those things lined up, they're like dominoes, and it's gonna go exactly how you want it to go because you've done the work in advance.
Yeah. And you just kind of blew my mind because like if you think about an organization in a kind of typical hierarchical structure, it can't be a grassroots movement because the grassroots are boots on the ground, right? They're like in the trenches. And so if they tried to do an organization wide movement, it's not built like that. Like, how could a grassroots in Japan affect change in the US without going all the way up and then coming back down? And then that perfectly fits into the idea of a organizational AV program, if you want that, right? Because you need that one vision to funnel down to the entire organization, if that's the solution you want for if you want standards, if you want consistency. I think having that program built from that top down is the only way you're going to see that across all sites and all buildings. That's really cool.
Yeah. Here's what I would. This is fascinating. So I think that you kind of mentioned, like, it couldn't be a grassroots movement. I think that's what you have probably at most sites right now, right? Most big organizations, whether they grew by acquisition or not, it's worse. It's more visible in companies that go through acquisition, I think.
For sure.
But individual sites kind of figure it out, right? Regional IT managers figure it out.
They have to. They
right.
don't have a choice.
They got customers.
Yeah.
They got customers to serve. They got to move. So I'm not faulting anyone for that. But if you want, again, start with why here. Let's pull Simon into the conversation. The whole, at the end of the day, the most important piece to all this is what the heck are we trying to do? Why are we trying to do it, right? We're trying to create a consistent experience
Yes.
because it helps our colleagues do better work, period, right? This is about serving our colleagues within these companies. It's about giving them a better experience. And you might have lots of reasons why you want to do that, right? And kind of go down to your whys, right? Which inevitably end up being sort of financially motivated if you're a business. Disruptions are expensive, right? Bad user experiences are expensive. Bad meetings are very expensive, especially in large organizations where they have a chance to scale out. So I guess all of that to say, if the point is to better serve our colleagues, and we decide the best way we want to do that, the best mechanism is creating a consistent user experience. So every time they walk in the room, any room, they kind of know what to expect. They know how to get new rooms, right? Not just in the room experience, but they know how to get new rooms. The programming feels the same. The training resources are in the same location, right? All of those pieces. The support resource is the same everywhere in the world, like the way you get help. All of those things, right, kind of wrap into the user experience, in this case, the colleague experience. And that's where you have to start. Make sure that you kind of make everything customer centric, right? Start with that, and then you build your program sort of around this concept of a consistent experience means every aspect of user experience, and you have to build a functioning program, a machine to move all of those pieces. We'll get into all the little bits and all the gears and cogs that make that giant machine possible, but I think if you start with that approach, it's much easier to win hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Much easier to win hearts and minds with that approach, especially if you go up the chain of command. Hey, CIO, director, VP, right? Whatever. Our customers, you don't even have to explain it because they totally get it, right? Our colleagues are having a hard time in meeting rooms because they're kind of a different thing all over the place, and especially now with more remote workers, right? The remote experience is dramatically different in all of these rooms now. Now we have to think about the other half of the room, the other half of the call, right? So I think it's an easy case to make. Once you get the buy-in, you're off to the races. There's a lot you can do to create an incredible experience kind of across those programs.
So Justin Watts, Justin, thank you for joining us again. We so love and value you. He brought up a very interesting question, and I'd like to fold his question into what I'd like to talk about, this idea of program management. He says this discussion changes at the scope and scale of your Googles, Facebooks, Apples, etc. It's an entirely different world. And yes, but like, what are some of the benefits, even at scale, of treating AV as a single program?
Well, I mean, I think I'll speak from experience, right? And I didn't work for Google or Facebook or Apple, but I did work for one of the largest semiconductor companies in the world, and had 3,000 conference rooms to manage around the globe. And I'll say this much: I think downscale, down market is where maybe the program can be, the ROI can be less tangible of an AV program, right? When you have one site, your two regional branches, there's less value, right? You're probably already working with one integrator anyway. So down market, that's where I see sort of the value maybe diminishing once you get more into like those, kind of mid-sized businesses, large businesses, up into the enterprise. I mean, this is exactly how we did it, right? We had to build. When I did this exact thing at a large enterprise, I had to do all of these things because the organization that I was in, which is very different than some other organizations, the organization that I was in had zero tolerance for funding an internal AV team. There was no money for this within IT. And so it was like, okay, here you go figure it out, right? But you don't get an army of you. Fine, right? How am I going to do that? Right. AV program, lots of outsourcing, lots of partnership, right? The machine has to run without me turning the cog. Is what it came down to, because I'm only one person. So yeah, I mean, tons of value at the enterprise and at the enterprise level. That doesn't mean one integrator is doing all your installs. We'll talk about that more later, right? Through the program. That doesn't mean singling one integrator. As a matter of fact, the program team doesn't even have to be an integrator for it to be valuable, right? It can be internal. I'd say that's what most large organizations do. Certainly the other large enterprise I worked had an internal AV program run very much the same way. Just how many heads are in-house versus out-of-house, I think, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and make that exact same point, right? Whether you're doing it outside your organization or inside of your organization, at that scale, the benefits from an AV program are clear. And, I always put on my PMI hat when I think about program and program management, and thinking, again, if you're only, it might not even be, Fred, you made the point, like one or two sites or a couple of regional sites. To me, it's more quantity of projects that help to not only projects, but quantity of projects and maybe initiatives that justify the idea of layering a program management practice over the top of those projects, because you have all these individual projects going on and you're maintaining the cadence and status of each of those projects, but how do you bring all that together cohesively? And it's, again, not just projects, exactly, not just projects, but initiatives, support programs, road mapping, the future of the organization, right? There's,
Lessons
you know,
learned, right? Yeah.
lessons learned, right? It's truly a program. And when implementing that kind of mindset, and the game at that point, right, I think quite often we fall into this mindset of, it's a project, we got to get this project done, and then we move on to the next project, and it's a project mentality, it's a project cadence. Whereas taking it from a program level, and it connects all the way back to what Fred mentioned in building that coalition, right? I imagine, Fred, and I'm looking for your feedback here, that coalition is built off of, it's built of many different stakeholders, but many of them are executive business people that are looking to try to connect this entire initiative to business outcomes and objectives and goals, right? So we often, again, back to that project mentality, want to install AV, want to get conference rooms working, want to install cool technology. Well, cool technology doesn't mean anything if it doesn't serve the needs of the business. And that's another, in my opinion, really crucial element of that program layer, taking all those projects, all those initiatives, all those variables, especially that just absolutely exponentially grow when you're talking about the scale of these global organizations. How do you wrangle all of that, and kind of, you gave the hand gesture, and boil it all the way up so that those business stakeholders can actually understand whether or not, quite frankly, all the money that they're spending on driving this program of projects and initiatives is actually meeting the goal. Is it being successful? So I'll stop there and wait for your comments there. But again, I can't help but always like coming at this a little bit from the PMI, portfolio project management, program management perspective.
Yeah. So here's what I would say. There's nothing new under the sun, right? And same with program management. That we didn't have to invent any of this. What we're doing is taking standard PMI, IT and project management principles and applying it to AV. Surprise, right? It's not anything too crazy here. I think. I guess I would say this is kind of why I said you have to start with the why, right, and the coalition, because if you don't have those things, it's very difficult to get the momentum to actually execute on the plan, which is what we all want to do, right? We want to execute on the plan. We want to get the new systems, the support tools. We want to put monitoring in. We want global configuration and change management, right? We want all these great things. But if you can't build some consistency to start in your deployment, just the deployment piece, all of those things become exponentially harder. So this was our approach here was always like, we're going to try to eliminate as much of the cost of chaos as we can, right? And the cost of chaos in this case is if you can't put all these pieces together, the projects that you're doing all over the world with all these different integrators, well, you're missing out on the lessons learned on every one of those projects, right? That other that other people can be benefiting from, that can be centralized in the knowledge, right, or whatever else. You're not creating any relationships in your vendor network, which actually turns out is very, very helpful to start creating some relationships, especially if you have a core coordination vendor who's doing the program. You want to connect them and actually put the responsibility of working with vendors and dealing with vendors in their hands, right? Regional integration and things like that, subcontractors. There's a ton of pieces that sort of build the viability here and help it happen. But I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point. The bottom line with all of that in my mind is, okay, you got to start with getting some level of executive support. Yes, you're tying that to business objectives. Absolutely. That's why this is a hard conversation for a lot of AV technical professionals, right? Because this is this is more of a sales conversation, honestly, right? This is a sales conversation within your organization. You just sell your executives on why we should be consistent. I think they mostly get it. You may even get an edict handed down to you, which is even better, right? That's some of the world I walked into. It was like, hey, go make all this consistent. Go, yes, right?
But I
That's
mean,
the best.
let's explore that. Like, what is the value of consistency? Like, why is it better to have every single conference room you deploy act the same, look the same, get maintained the same, versus why not have the different regions just kind of off on their own?
Yeah, there's actually, I've seen in practicality two schools of thought on this, which is pretty fascinating. I'm obviously in the top-down kind of centrally managed approach. I've seen talked to colleagues of mine that have sort of a no, we kind of let them do what they want because their culture is different, right? And this is like different cities, up and down the California coast, like just within like one state. Like no, they kind of got a different thing going on at each one of them. Maybe they were acquired, startups and stuff like that, and that's okay, right? And if that's what works, then that's what works. What I've found is as you start to roll this stuff into IT in particular, IT organizations are responsible for it. Well, now you have some administration concerns, in particular security concerns. And that's when standardization, that's one reason standardization can be
Yeah.
extremely helpful,
Awesome. Awesome.
right? So, okay, there's a critical vulnerability released on XYZ
Yep.
touch panels,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um,
Awesome.
where are they? Right? Or can you update them? Do you have the information? Do you have scripting already created for that? Well, if you've got 15 different manufacturers of touch panels throughout your environment, no centralized database of all of those endpoints, no monitoring in place, right? All of the pieces, you you don't have an answer. You're not even going to be able to ask your environment the question, right? When your CISO says, "Hey, Crestron's got a vulnerability. How does it affect us?" Right? Log4j. How does it affect us? Right?
Right.
Those answers don't come easily. So there's 1,000 reasons why efficiency helps from a technical perspective, and we could get into all of those. The other half is the user experience side, which I would think is kind of self-evident, right? And maybe I feel like historically, maybe it was a kind of a thin reason, to say, well, if you go to this office, and this office, you'll have the same experience. Because who's really traveling, between 6 different offices?
Well,
Executives,
the most
largely.
important, yeah, the most
Yeah,
important
executives.
people in the
Well, right.
organization.
I mean, it's kind of my point, right? Like, so this is pageantry, right? There's a little bit of theater we're doing here to make it look like there's more
Right.
established standards in place and things like that. And my former CIO used those exact words. It's like you got to do a little theater here, right? There's a little theater. We got to work on the executive spaces. We got to, you got to kind of show progress in order to maintain hearts and minds. Dirty little secret, right? So that's how the omelet's made. So I would say the user experience in a more decentralized world, that's where it gets very interesting, right? You have remote participants now. So your standards is not so much about what's in the room. I mean, it certainly is, but it's like 50% of it, right? Or less, because you have less than 50% of your users in the conference room,
Yeah.
right? So now what's the remote experience look like? Not only the stuff they're using, right? But what do they see when they look at the room? What do they see when they meet with those rooms? 10 rooms on the same video conferencing call, right? Are they having a consistent experience? Does one room look like crap? Whatever.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
whole other
Grid.
element of user
I
experience
gotta
beyond
connect
just the
to,
furniture,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible. And another benefit is the relationship. I'd say vendor relationship, both manufacturer and integrator, because when you have global standards that you can roll out and you are applying those standards around the world, you can have different conversations with manufacturers than if it's just regionally procured, and they
Yeah.
might kind of pep up a little bit if all of a sudden we're going to put your displays, your codec, your mixer in every conference room around the world. Like it's a different conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted, Jay. But I was hoping we were going to make it through this episode without having to use that one, but it seems like
It's a
2020 is
big
still
deal,
haunting
though.
us.
It's a big deal. Not only to get like what you want, but to have those conversations like, can you get us to the front of the line? I want to see this feature in the next firmware. You start to make things move, you know?
100%. And Jay, I'm sure Jay has something he wants to say on this, but I'll jump in quickly in saying that's how I won my procurement team over. That was it. It was we don't have negotiation. We don't have any power to negotiate with our vendors when we buy this stuff through 36 different suppliers all over the country with no global visibility. I can't forecast how many units I'm looking at across all my projects. That alone, right? Just that bat to swing with a manufacturer, lovingly, right? Lovingly swing the bat. But
It's
you know,
mutually beneficial for
you,
sure.
you gotta
Yeah.
forecasting, that was a big part of the
Yeah.
program, right? Hey, we got 400 touch panels we're going to deploy over the next 2 quarters or whatever, so heads up on that. Here's when I'm going to need them and in what countries, so you can get them stamped appropriately and get them in distribution, right? So we work both ways, right? Give us a better price, give me one person with your company to negotiate with, not 47 regional sales managers.
Which is another huge benefit. Yes.
Yes, and a challenge with a lot of manufacturers. Most are not. Some are well prepared to do that. Many are not.
Yeah.
Then be able to say, let's negotiate pricing and forecast on roadmap and availability. We haven't got to the supply chain concerns, which is kind of hurting a bit of that reasoning right now. Or maybe it's more important than it's ever been, right? That we have visibility on stocks, and supply chain is so hard to come by.
Yeah. And if you want to talk scale, like now all of a sudden I'm coming from Facebook and I'm saying, I've got 15,000 conference rooms. I need your product to do this. Yeah, exactly.
Get people's attention.
So yeah.
Well, I don't think it'd be an appropriate AV podcast if somebody didn't mute their mic inappropriately somewhere in the middle. So thanks for the call out on that.
I think you're muted, buddy.
Yeah, I get, it's better than hearing the keyboard click, because we have some really good comments coming in
fired
on the show. And so I want to interact here a little bit and give some feedback that is relevant to what we're talking about. Justin Watts, again, has just had incredible program management experience within very large organizations. He works for one of those fruit companies now and is responsible for program management and engineering standards. And he put a post in there, dollars equals decision points with vendors, which, man, 100%, right? And what better way to make a bigger decision than to consolidate all those dollars into one single conversation, at least, whether it's multiple vendors or not, but giving that kind of visibility up. But then Brent Stanfill is on the feed today. Shout out to Brent Stanfill. And he had the question, how are you pivoting the consistency plan with the supply chain issues, which you started to touch on, Fred, right? So BUs or business units are expecting standardization. So let's take a minute and talk about that, because I will say my experience is varied in this particular area.
Yes.
It has not been a consistency across the board.
Yeah. So here's, if I were to put myself in this position, right? If I were to try to put my old enterprise technology manager hat on and go, what do I do in this situation? It's a huge challenge. I would say two things. What are the approaches you can take? One, more lobbying, more bat swinging. I think that has a time limit on it, right? There's only so much you can do, and most of the manufacturers have kind of made it clear. It's like, you can't listen. I got a million thing. I got a million touch panels in the queue. Like, I don't need your additional 300. I can't fulfill them anyway. So that the bat swinging, it loses its impact when supply chain gets compressed and you start having these problems. So this is a really good conversation point. There's a difference in consistency of make, model, SKU implementation and consistency of user experience. Okay? Absolutely. You take a Zoom room on manufacturer A and a Zoom room on manufacturer B, the user experience is very, very similar, right? Almost indistinguishable, provided the endpoints perform in an expected way or in a designed in a reasonable way, right? Audio, video, microphone, etc. As long as those elements are there, then you can still provide a consistent experience while varying it up a bit on endpoint hardware. It's a slippery slope. It can be dangerous, right? Because now you're back to the firmware question, you're back to the monitoring question, you're back to the management platform question. Yeesh. Yeah. I would venture to say, I'm going to step out here in future land for a minute and then let these guys jump in. But I would venture to say, this is the ultimate lesson for the AV industry on why software is king. Software deployed on commodity hardware. That's the game. That would be king. So if we're sitting here 10 years ago and you're using commodity compute, or forget 10 years ago, right now, if you in all of your conference rooms are running, PCs managed in an MDM solution, right? Well, if Dell runs out, you go to HP, and if HP runs out, you go to whoever, right? Asus, right? They go through all the different PC manufacturers. That's commodity hardware, right? That's a much bigger market segment in the semiconductor industry. They have a way bigger bat to swing than AV industry, right? We're like this much fighting against these giant organizations and industries like automotive, right? Data center.
I heard our industry recently described as the fly on the butt of the elephant as it relates to our place in the supply chain related to these other industries. And I was like, wow, that's an uncomfortable visual, but kind of true to your point.
Yes. Yeah. I guess I would just say, ultimate lesson opportunity here, right? The companies that already pivoted, like the end user organizations that already pivoted to commodity hardware, that didn't sole source themselves into a single vendor solution, that didn't go the way of hardware appliances, but went the way of software instead, whether they developed internally or with Zoom and use standard IT tools like enterprise MDM solutions and such. They're having a lot less of a hard time. Right? They're having a lot less of a hard time right now than everybody else who's standardized on one type of unified communications appliance that's sole sourced through one vendor. Much harder situation to be in. So this is a lesson in commodity hardware and software, in my opinion. The industry's done a pretty poor job of doing this earlier, right? And of course not. They're making a lot of money, right? Like we haven't done it yet, but it's coming, and it's coming fast. Yeah. That's what I would say.
And to be fair, they stand to make a lot more money moving to software, right? Because then it becomes a subscription. You don't need to buy chips. You don't need to have factories. It's a whole different model. It'll be a painful shift for sure, but profits are still there.
Yeah, I mean, they got an uphill battle, and that is because the manufacturers, largely speaking, don't sell direct to customers. So you have to sell subscriptions through the channel on CapEx funds. Just think about that problem, right? If you are an AV manufacturer and you want to implement, let's say, a maintenance fee on a software control system license, or a subscription for a software-based control system license. Well, you're now relying on your integrator to go sell a subscription service and to continue to pay for a subscription service, where the history in the industry has been, I installed it once and it works forever. I never have to touch this thing again. It'll work for 20 years. That's a challenge. That I would say the AV industry, as much as it would benefit the AV industry to move towards full subscription revenue, as much as organizations like the TSIA, right, Technology Services Industry Association, has been screaming at the top of their lungs for 10 years, hardware sales are going down, hardware attached sales are going down, subscription revenue is going up, professional services are going up, move your business model, like swallow the fish. They've been shouting this, and you can see Cisco and Big Blue, right, CDW, you go through the list of Avaya, right, everybody's switching. And the AV industry is still very much centered on hardware attached services. So I don't know. This is a hard one, right? It's chicken or the egg conversation in my mind, and maybe both. You got to have some really good integrators, some really good customers, and some great software developers that are going to get out there and after it.
Yeah, it's disruptive. But that's it. The world changes so fast nowadays, and I think I think it's fair to say that clearly this is where it's going. And to your point about just satisfying the user needs, just basing it on functionality, not coming to the table with a box in mind. I mean that's CTSD 101, 101.
Mhm.
Didn't mean to. All right, CTSD 101.
Wow.
Sinners, terrible. Focus. Um, yeah. What user need do I have to satisfy?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that
Consistent
I don't care
experience.
how we do it. Just
so
can my users?
there it is, right? Like that's what's happening, I think, in light of the supply chain issue. We've all been beating the drum so hard of standardized hardware, standardized kit, and what we're really talking about is standardized outcome, standardized experience. Doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a particular hardware solution. That's that's interesting. Going back, just sourcing it back to Brent's question, which is how are you dealing with that? I've had some clients stay completely true and loyal to their hardware kit and literally say to me, I will wait. And I'm not mentioning any names, even though Fred mentioned them earlier. I will wait until 2023 if that's how long I have to wait, because I have standardized on my hardware kits. And yet other customers are saying, I don't care. So many of the commoditized conference rooms, right? It's a native Teams room, it's a native Zoom room, it's a native Cisco room. Well, asterisk from a Cisco perspective, but generally speaking, right? Those are the three. Those are the three in the upper right quadrant. But there's a lot of different vendors out there that can provide that same experience. And to share some insight from Justin, who again is been operating in that gigantic, largest companies in the world program management space, he had an answer to that question, which was, we've built both secondary and tertiary standardized packages with the associated adjustments in price to show the impact. We standardize on the user experience. My users don't care how it works as long as it works the same, regardless of the manufacturer, right? I think that's a really wise statement, and can be really hard for technology people to get on board with, right? Because we have our favorites, right? We have our
Relationship,
You
yeah.
get attached, kind of in some cases kind of emotionally attached to hardware, and then there's like the operational logistics around. You get really good at configuring a piece of hardware or knowing exactly how that piece of
Yeah.
hardware or that particular solution reacts, and there's efficiency, there's economies of scale from an integration standpoint. But we're at a time now where that mindset has to shift, and I think that's a perfect example of it. I just wanted to share a couple more comments because we have some monsters on the feed here giving some
So
really
good
good
to see.
insight to the idea of program management. And Justin brought up like the global, very large scale companies, and the fact that the program needs to scale differently, and it's not a one size fit all. And he's saying, I'm not saying a single program isn't beneficial. I've been preaching that for years. I'm saying how you go about it isn't one size fits all. I've
Yeah.
managed programs across 15,000 rooms. I've had different componentized approaches to build the value proposal. It wasn't one size fits all as it sounds like here. And I kind of want to correct that, because I don't know that we're positing that it's a one size fits all. I think, just to your point of approaching AV within an environment, within an enterprise as a program, you have to modify that program. You have to adapt that program to the needs of that individual organization and the stakeholders within that individual organization. I think we would all agree with that comment.
100%. Yeah.
It's hard to
No
argue.
disagreement.
Yeah.
And yes, and just understanding that, yeah, every organization is unique. It has unique stakeholders. It has unique business proposition, internally. So totally in support of that comment. And very important for anyone who's trying to do this either inside of an end user organization or as a service provider, right? Don't go into this with blinders on thinking, you're going to follow like a predefined checklist spreadsheet, right? That has all the steps. Like, you're going to have to build it, and it's it's going to happen as you go. I totally agree with Mr. Watts there.
Yeah, 100%. Jim, do you got some comments there? Wow,
you know?
we've been joined by the powerful Tom Care. See, I got it right this time, Tom.
I
Tom
know.
Care. A couple of other comments related to vibe off of this, where we're headed. Casey Baldwin joined up here, and I
Casey
won't
Baldwin.
say the name of the organization, but I know he used to be a manager at a just really large global organization, and he had a comment. Right, I've watched one of the largest companies in the world try to roll out simple programs that fail, as they had no buy-in from their regional offices or down to the individual buildings. It's so hard to be the one rolling out the program with no buy-in and no coalitions. With no coalition, it takes years to finally get it right. And by that time, with a technology advancing, it's already old tech. So, what a great comment. Just program management is not specific to audiovisual, right? Program management is a concept that applies to anything that you're trying to do in the world today, especially in the business space. And I think that concept of building a coalition, building your champions, and winning hearts and minds, like that's a recipe for success no matter what type of program you're trying to establish.
Yeah. Even just from a standpoint of sharing information, right? Because if a huge lesson, whatever the lesson be, if a huge lesson is learned in India, how are we going to get that information and that lesson learned over to the folks in Japan or in the UK or whatever without having that program mentality, right? Like if and that's kind of what I love about having that program management mentality is there there's just there's one program, and so if a concern is raised, if a challenge is raised, if a lesson is learned, funnels up to the top of the program, and then quality assurance is changed, a checklist is changed, a piece of equipment is changed out, but then it gets funneled back down to everyone, and everyone benefits from that lesson learned. It's a beautiful thing, and I don't know how you do that with every region doing its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're taking a rosy view of it, and I agree that that's the goal, that's the idea. I think we've seen the implementation can be a lot messier than we want it to be, especially when you're working with, you got global subcontractors, right? You're working with multiple vendors across multiple regions, across multiple languages and multiple cultures, and things sometimes get lost, right? So it's a big challenge. I could almost think like the people best suited for this are like not even AV people, right? Like just a program manager who understands structure and shape and coalition building and the right executive sponsors and the right engineers within the program to say, here's the ways we should do it, the right architecture. Because it's just another IT program at the end of the day. And the challenge, the things that we had to learn trying to kind of do this for the first time, and the
Yeah,
things I had to learn, I'll speak for myself, trying to do this for the first time. I mean, those are all things I could have probably avoided you know, had I engaged earlier in like my IT PMO at that organization. So I'm like, no, I need like, coalition, right? This needs to be an official program. It's handed down. Like, I'm not going to go build it on my own completely. I need help doing this.
yeah. But I mean, I think you nailed it because as we get more involved in these program management offerings, we are learning and we are honing it to a group. I mean, just my mind is going like 40 million miles an hour. Forgive me, but the time and commitment it takes to really realize the benefits that can be gleaned from this approach is incredible. And just like right now for one of our enterprise clients, for one of our program management clients, we're thinking about having like quarterly global partner summits to make sure everyone who touches this program is on the same page. We're thinking about having quarterly single partner touch points so that we can offer feedback. And without that program mentality, I don't know that that would happen. And we're just realizing how much is involved in this offering, but it's to make that program incredible. Like it takes a lot. I'm not. I know I'm painting a rosy picture, I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that the opportunity is there, and it continues to improve the more we offer it. I'm really excited about it.
I'll just it's a great point that you make, Jim, and I don't think that you can do. I agree with you. I don't think that that type of initiative or effort around kind of vendor or partner management scales well without that program model in place, right? You've got to have the capacity, you got to have the throughput, you got to have the quantity to go through it. But when you do, there's a lot of benefit to have, which to me comes back to the beginning, which is how do you drive a consistent experience, right? And it's not like we've been talking a lot about user experience, but experience is it's in the eye of the beholder, right? And every beholder has a different eye, and many of those beholders aren't the ones actually using the systems.
Yes.
So when you think about what's a
Yes.
consistent experience and the power that a program has to kind of give that unified experience feeling, and I like what Fred said in terms of what his previous CIO said. There's some theater in it, right? If you think about a project and you take a project as it is, it's like going to a circus sometimes, right? You're gonna like the path is never straight. It's fraught with all kinds of just unexpectedness. And as much as we put effort towards controlling all that unexpectedness, at the end of the day, you have an outcome, right? And so without bringing all of the unexpectedness that happens from these individual projects, but kind of boiling it up into a single, I don't know what the right word is, like a single reporting mechanism or a single experience for key stakeholders, right? So for me, process has always been a key component of experience, right? I've always said customer experience is how you deliver a process, and you have these different customers, right? Again, kind of separating away from that end user. I'm interacting with the technology, I'm interacting with the room 100%, like everybody agrees that consistency. But how does the client side program manager interact with you? How does the CIO and all the line of business stakeholders get the information that they need? How can you take an approach that unifies, understandably, adapted to each individual organization, because each individual organization has their needs, but building a process, building a program can ultimately drive that experience. And you're hitting on like partner programs that impact the people that deploy and support these systems, right? The people that rely on whatever team it is to deploy these systems to have the same outcome at the end of the day. That process, that proactive stance that you're taking on working with those partners to help bring up everybody to that standard, to those expectations. These are all, like, this goes all the way back to the beginning, right? All these little things add up to drive a consistent experience, not just with the end user, but with every single stakeholder, every single benefactor. It's funny, there's a comment about benefactors versus stakeholders on the feed, and the power that benefactors sometimes shouldn't have. But regardless, all of these people have a stake in the success of this program, and how you deliver that program can either give that feeling of consistency or give that feeling of, I'll just say, going to a circus, right? The inconsistency of a single project, right? The layer of program affords an opportunity, in my opinion, to drive towards that consistent experience for everybody that interacts with the program, from the user all the way up to the owner of the organization and every executive stakeholder on down the line.
100%. Yeah, totally agree. Because we're starting to wrap up on time, guys. So I'm wondering, Jay, are there any really interesting questions in the chat we want to get into, or do we want to get into maybe some top takeaways or summary?
Aside from Justin saying the phrase "hearts and minds" caused my PTSD to ramp up, I think we've
Or him throwing around diadem, like What? What? All right.
He's using words I don't understand. Maybe
Yeah.
we should invite him onto the show. No,
He's
no,
cruising for it.
no, I think we're good. And I just, again, shout out to everybody that joined the show today, but especially
Yes.
to
Thank
Justin.
you.
Like, you have such relevant experience in this particular topic and subject matter. So thank you for all of your wisdom and sharing with us and interacting with us today. I think I just gave kind of my last comments, or what gets my fire stoked when you think about experience as it drives around the process. So I'll hand it over to you guys for kind of last takeaways.
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in with mine. I would say, trying to be practical for a moment, because we've talked a lot about the value of program management. And, you know, it's interesting because I think it might be even a foregone conclusion to some degree, right? Like, yeah, it's valuable, but how? How do you do it? Yeah, we want everyone to be the same, but how are we going to get there? And while I can't like give you a playbook per se, I can say here's like 3 things that stick in my head as far as really important, like core things to remember and to live by. I would say reduce complexity wherever you possibly can. That might mean standardizing on hardware. It might mean putting everything through a single program manager with like 12 or 15 project managers reporting to them and 6 engineers or whatever. But like one hand to shake, we'll put it that way, right? Like eliminate as much complexity as you can, right? Get rid of as many of those things as you can. Get rid of variability wherever you possibly can, right? Just eliminate complexity, right? Go after it, because that it's already a complicated beast to implement. So the less complexity you have, the better, right? Go as simple as possible. That's kind of thing number 1. Thing number 2 is implement a quality assurance program, like as a part of it. Have QA as a part of it, right? So yes, you've said this is how it should be, right? Do all of this stuff exactly like this. But make sure that there's somebody that's going to go through that at the end of the day, right? Like training your partners, for example, any of your integration partners, get them all trained up on UV 9000, right? Like get them all certified up, get them go through, have your QA checklist, have your quality management system in place. Make sure that every single system that goes in, every piece of gear that gets plugged in goes through the same sort of testing procedure, regardless of where it is in the world, because that's the equalizer, right? And that might even be a third party quality assurance team. It could be a separate sort of tiger team from your internal program that's going to go fly, go fly to sites and go do the thing, go train people and build partnerships. But that is critical because it's the last mile, and it's where a lot of integrators and it's a lot of where a lot of AV systems fall short. Is that last mile. And last thing, like I said at the beginning, sponsorship, coalition building, right? You got to have somebody who believes in this and has the authority to enact it. Without that, you can just keep slogging away, So that's the hard part, and lobbying for that is the key. It's everything.
I love it.
Great comments, Fred.
Yeah, man. I'm not even gonna touch takeaway because I think I think you just knocked that out of the park, man. The only thing I'll add is we got InfoComm coming up, and I'm going to be there. I know you guys are going to be there, and I am so excited to see a lot of our AV peeps there and continue these conversations, talk about experiences, talk about everything AV. It's going to be a great show, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, and if you didn't know, this guy right here, he's going to be giving a session on creating a consistent user experience at scale. So building upon all of our discussions today, come see Mr. Jim Maltese at InfoComm. He's in, oh geez, it doesn't tell me what room you're in. 10:30 to 11:30 on June 7th.
Rooms over
He's
there.
somewhere in the convention center. You'll work
not
it
a
out.
big place. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Jim is going to keep building upon what we talked about here. Fred's presenting on monitoring. Jim and I have a really fun presentation to do on intelligibility, and may or may not have some face masks to bring into the mix and see how that impacts. So like
They
everybody else
might
has
be
said,
pink, fuchsia.
Pink?
What do we agree on?
pink face mask. We didn't talk
What?
about pink face
All right.
masks. That is
Pink. Yeah,
not
we
on the
definitely
checklist,
did,
man.
bro. Like that was the whole thing.
Now I want flamingos. Like, can we get pink flamingo based?
Yeah, we can figure
I'm
that
gonna
out.
need you to send that shirt over, Fred, so
Yeah,
we can
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
probably make a dual layered.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, everybody, like us on Facebook, follow us on YouTube. This was our first LinkedIn broadcast, and it went, I think, pretty well. Certainly didn't have Gain telling us that our audio sucked, so we'll take that as a win. But we'll be back for more here in a couple of weeks leading up to InfoComm, and really looking forward to seeing everybody. Fred, thanks for being with us again today,
Yeah,
man.
brother. So good
Absolutely,
to have
my pleasure.
Awesome. All right. See everybody in June.
Awesome. Later.